Welcome to the second research symposium of the day, Understanding Problematic Media Use in Children and Adolescents, Global Insights on Risk and Resilience. I am Dr. John Mootz. I am the Senior Policy and Research Manager at Children and Screens. This symposium brings together international interdisciplinary research, examining the multidimensional risks linked to problematic digital media use in youth. Together, the three presentations today will highlight the need to consider ecological, social, and structural factors in assessing and addressing problematic digital media use in youth. Unfortunately, our fourth presenter, Vincent Packin, was unable to attend due to travel delays. So we just have three presenters today, and let's get started. Our first presentation is on associations between problematic screen use, mental health, sleep, and substance use among early adolescents, a prospective cohort study by Dr. Jason Nagata. Dr. Nagata is an associate professor of pediatrics at the University of California, San Francisco, specializing in adolescent and young adult medicine and researching adolescent screen use and health behaviors. Dr. Nagata.
Thank you so much. I have no conflicts of interest to disclose and funding from the National Institutes of Health and the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation. Early adolescence, defined as ages 10 to 15, is an important period for the development of lifestyle behaviors, including screen use. It's a common age range for the initiation of smartphone and social media use, and can also establish patterns of use that can persist throughout the life course into adulthood. Screen use in early adolescence has been rising, especially in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. Based on data from the Adolescent Brain Cognitive Development Study, we found that social media use in particular is common even among under 13-year-olds. Now, technically, 13 is the minimum age requirement for social media use, but we found that almost two-thirds of 11 to 12-year-olds nationally do have social media accounts. And on average, those who have social media accounts have over 3 different accounts. 68% had TikTok accounts, making it the most common social media platform, although Snapchat and Instagram were also common. And some adolescents report having secret social media accounts that are hidden from their parents. Now, there has been some research in relationships between screen time and mental health prospectively in this early adolescent age group. And so also from the ABCD study, finding that screen time has prospectively been associated with a range of mental health symptoms, including depression, anxiety, somatic symptoms, ADHD, and oppositional defiant symptoms. But these are generally small effect sizes. When examining social media time specifically across 4 years in early adolescence, we found that individual increases in social media time were associated with elevated depression symptoms in subsequent follow-up intervals, but not the reverse. There's more scholarship on problematic screen use beyond screen time, as screen time doesn't capture nuances of context and patterns of screen use. And problematic screen use, there's no formal diagnosis yet, although Dr. Chrisakis has recently proposed some, but there are varying definitions, and it can include elements of addiction, including withdrawal, tolerance, conflict, and relapse, and it can affect adolescents' quality of life, their relationships, and their daily and school functioning. In general, problematic screen use is understudied in early adolescence, particularly when compared to screen time. One way of measuring problematic social media use is the Social Media Addiction Questionnaire, which has 6 elements of addiction or problematic use. And among these early adolescents, we found that problematic social media use is actually relatively common, with almost half of adolescents, or a large number of adolescents, saying that they spend a lot of time thinking about their social media use or planning the use of social media. 18% say they use social media apps to forget about their problems. 16% say they tried to use social media apps less but can't. Given these gaps in understanding of problematic social media use, the goal of this study was to examine prospective associations between problematic social media use and mental and behavioral health outcomes in early adolescence, such as depressive symptoms, suicide behaviors, sleep disturbance, and substance experimentation. We analyzed data from the Adolescent Brain Cognitive Development Study, the largest long-term study of brain development and child health in the United States, which started in baseline 2016 to 2018 across 21 different study sites. And in this analytic sample, we had a little over 7,000 early adolescents who were followed in the 2-year follow-up when the problematic social media use measure was first introduced, and 1 year afterwards for mental health outcomes. These are the 21 different sites across the US that the ABCD study recruits from. And measures included social media addiction questionnaire for problematic social media use. For mental health outcomes, we measured the child behavior checklist. For sleep disturbance and duration, the Munich chronotype and sleep disturbance scale for children were used. For suicide behaviors, the Kitty schedule for affective disorders was used. And for substance experimentation, the ABCD had a youth substance use survey. In terms of statistical analysis, we analyzed multivariable, logistic, and linear regression models with the predictor variable of problematic social media use at ages 11 to 12, with 1-year follow-up for binary and continuous outcomes as mentioned before, and a number of socio-demographic covariates using Stata and applying sample weights to represent the US census population. So these are the results of the prospective analyses with problematic social media use at ages 11 to 12 and mental health symptoms 1 year later. So as you can see, overall, there were associations. The strongest was with depression, followed by oppositional and conduct problems, as well as attention deficit, while anxiety and somatic problems, confidence intervals crossed 0, but there was still a trend. In terms of suicide outcomes, higher problematic social media use at 11 to 12 years was associated with almost twice greater odds of suicide behaviors 1 year later. In terms of sleep outcomes, problematic social media use at ages 11 to 12 was associated with shorter sleep duration and greater sleep disturbance 1 year later. And when looking at substance experimentation, problematic social media use at ages 11 to 12 was associated with greater marijuana, tobacco, and alcohol experimentation, and overall total substance use experimentation. So just to summarize these findings, problematic social media use at 11 to 12 years old was prospectively associated with worse mental, sleep, and behavioral outcomes 1 year later, including greater depressive, conduct, oppositional, and attention deficit symptoms, greater suicidal behaviors, lower sleep duration, greater sleep disturbance, and greater odds of substance experimentation across alcohol, nicotine, and cannabis. I think one thing to note is that the effect sizes or the strengths of the association of problematic social media use, which are the arrows or the confidence intervals on the right and the orange and red, were actually greater in magnitude than those associated from the ABCD study with screen time, indicating that problematic social media use may be a better predictor of some of these mental health outcomes than screen time alone. Some potential mechanisms explaining these associations. We did examine sleep, but we also know that shorter sleep and more disrupted sleep can contribute to worse mental health. Cyberbullying conflict, exposure to negative interactions online can exacerbate emotion dysregulation and depression symptoms. Fear of missing out may drive compulsive checking and worsen mental health. And then in terms of reward system dysregulation, intermittent likes and notifications can mimic addictive reinforcement loops, worse for ADHD-prone brains, and cognitive overload, like constant multitasking and notifications, may disrupt attention and self-regulation. Some of the strengths of this study are a large demographically diverse national sample of US early adolescents, with a prospective study design across multiple health outcomes. Some limitations, though, include a self-report to data, which can be subject to response or social desirability bias, some possible unmeasured confounders. And in terms of clinical implications, first for parents, actually the ABCD study did ask about different parent rules and monitoring for the adolescents in this study. And the parent media practices that were associated with higher problematic use were actually parents' own media use. So the more that parents use media in front of their kids, the more likely their children were to exhibit problematic social media use. And then allowance of family mealtime screen use and bedroom screen use was also associated with greater problematic screen use. Again, these are for young adolescents, 11 to 12 years old, and parent monitoring and limiting was actually associated with lower problematic screen use in these early adolescents, 11 to 12 years old. I also just wanted to mention that in conjunction with the Congress, we are publishing this week a review on problematic social media use interventions for mental health outcomes in adolescents. And so overall, this reviews some recent literature on interventions like randomized controlled trials aimed at reducing problematic social media use in adolescents aged 10 to 20. And that includes therapy-based interventions like cognitive behavioral therapy, media literacy interventions, and social media limits, so just limits for parents on time. So with that, I'm very grateful for our lab group at UCSF, some funders, including the National Institutes of Health and the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation, and happy to take any questions.
I'm Troy Jacobs. I'm a pediatrician. I didn't see any data in terms of disaggregation by like gender or anything like that. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for this analysis, we did look for interactions by sex and didn't find that there were any differences. But I think it's a really good point. This is specifically looking at problematic social media use, but the ABCD study does have measures of like problematic video game use, which we know tends to have greater prevalence in male populations. So I do think that the specific modality could have some gender differences. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nagata. So please join me in welcoming our next presenter with gender differences in the association between problematic social media use and life satisfaction, a cross-national perspective among 39 countries by Dr. Jane Shawcroft. Dr. Shawcroft is an incoming assistant professor in the School of Communication at the Ohio State University. Her research examines how technology influences the social and emotional development of children and adolescents, with a particular emphasis on how social and family contexts shape these processes. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Shawcroft.
Okay, is this my clicker? All right. Okay, so thanks for asking that question about gender, because that's what we're going to talk about more. So there's a lot of conversation, particularly in public spaces, about the observed disproportionate effects that we see on social media on girls' well-being, particularly compared to boys. And so to try and understand these patterns better, we asked two questions in the study. So first, we wanted to look at between-country variability in gender differences in the association between problematic social media use and life satisfaction. We asked this question because we noticed that the way we talk about these gender differences, particularly in public spaces, seems to kind of treat them as these inherent differences that are sort of just the status quo with the way that adolescents are interacting with and affected by social media. However, if we see variability in these gendered patterns among different cultural contexts, what that tells us, right, is that this isn't just this inherent pattern, but something that is a part of the social fabric that adolescents are living within. So that second question, right, that we asked was really focused on looking at how different indicators of gendered dynamics in different countries might be related to those gendered patterns we're seeing, again, in the association between problematic social media use and life satisfaction. So to answer those questions, we used data from the United Nations, the World Bank, and then the Health Behaviors in School-Aged Children study. So we had data from a little over 200,000 adolescents living in 39 different countries in the global north. Those are the countries in blue, are the ones that we had in our data. And so for that first research question, we started by just calculating the correlation between problematic social media use and life satisfaction for boys and girls, again, in each of those countries that we had in our data. And then we just took a different score. And what we see here in this graph is that the overall trend is that girls show larger, more negative associations between their problematic social media use and life satisfaction compared to boys. But when we zoom in on these differences, we do see that there is between country variability. And we even see that we have two countries in our data set, Israel and Norway, where boys are actually showing these larger, more negative associations between their problematic social media use and life satisfaction. And so because there's variability, as a scientist, that's really exciting because it means I can predict it, right? And that's what I love to do. And so what we did is we specified a three-way interaction where we looked at how 12 different indicators of current and also historical gender differences in health, in economic resources, in leadership, and in education, and how those different indicators were predicted the moderating effect of gender on the association between problematic social media use and life satisfaction. So one problem we have, though, is when we're looking at these like really macro, super high-level constructs, there's just a lot of collinearity, there's a lot of causal spaghetti, right? Your education is going to be related to your health, and your health is going to be related to economic resources and leadership. And so to kind of deal with that problem, what we did is we used a multiverse analysis to specify every single possible iteration of this model with those 12 different indicators so that we could parse out how different covariates and constructs are going to be shaping and affecting each other. The problem that we get then, right, is this is a really data-driven approach. And when you take a really data-driven approach, you really limit the generalizability of your model. So, to make my life more hard, we did 10 k-fold cross-validations where we ran this multiverse 10 different times on 10 random subsamples of 60% of our data. So what this lets us do, right, is we're able to extract the t-statistics for each of those covariates, and then we can plot them for each of the different iterations of our model. So that's what you're looking at here. And because, again, this is a really data-driven approach, we wanted to focus on, and what I'm going to talk about next, are the findings we have that are the most robust, right? These are the indicators that are really consistent across all of those 40,000 different iterations of this model in terms of the directionality of the effects that we're seeing. So those constructs I'm going to talk about are gender differences in adolescent health, educational attainment, and then women's legal protections in society. So, okay, diving into what's happening with adolescent physical health. So on the x-axis or on the y-axis of this graph, this is the interaction between gender and problematic social media use predicting life satisfaction. And then on our x-axis, we have adolescent health differences. So a 0 on this graph, on that x-axis, would mean that boys and girls are reporting the same level of physical health. And then positive values are countries where boys are reporting that they are healthier than girls are. And so what this graph is telling us is that in countries where boys report better physical health compared to girls, there's also a larger gender difference in the association between problematic social media use and life satisfaction. When we parse that out, it isn't just that girls are showing larger, more negative associations in countries where there are larger health disparities between boys and girls, but in countries where boys are healthier than girls, boys are also reporting these smaller, more null associations between their problematic social media use and life satisfaction. And it's actually a larger effect size that we see for boys than for girls. And this tells us, right, that it isn't just that being unhealthy is risky, right, in the context of social media use, but being physically healthy is a very protective context, right, in terms of making social media use maybe more benign part of your life, right? And when it comes to life satisfaction and well-being. Moving on to education. So same y-axis as before. On the x-axis here, we have inequalities in education. So again, 0, that red dotted line, is where boys and girls are receiving same levels of education. And positive values are where men are receiving more education compared to women. And what this graph is telling us is that in countries where men receive more education than women, we also see smaller gender differences in the association between problematic social media use and life satisfaction. And for a woman who has spent her entire life in education, and that is my job, and that is my life, and that is what I live and breathe, my first thought was like, shit, because that's just a bummer. But when we dig into this, I think this is like a really interesting and for me was a really compelling finding. So what we see here is that in countries where boys receive more education than girls, boys show stronger negative associations between their problematic social media use and life satisfaction compared to boys who live in countries where girls are receiving more education than boys. And then we see the exact same pattern but opposite for girls, right? And what I think this points to is that essentially educational pressures are creating a risky context for problematic social media use and well-being for both boys and girls, right? This can be caused probably by sleep, by stress and time pressures, but there's something going on with educational pressures, particularly in a gendered way, that we're seeing is kind of changing on a macro level the associations between problematic social media use and life satisfaction. And then finally, if we turn our results around to women's legal protections in society. So our construct we use to measure this is called the Women, Business, and the Law Index. It's created by the World Bank, and it assesses women's legal protections in various facets of society. And so higher numbers represent countries where women have more legal protections. And this graph is telling us that in countries where women have more legal protections, we also see smaller gender differences in the association between problematic social media use and life satisfaction. But when we break this down, I thought this was really surprising. We see this pattern because for both boys and girls, living in a country where women have more legal protections is associated with stronger, more negative associations between problematic social media use and life satisfaction. What I think is happening here, this Women, Business, and the Law Index is really highly correlated to things like GDP and just overall development, right? If you live in a country where women have a lot of legal protections in society, you also live in a country with less food insecurity, with less violence, with less social instability. And so some of those heavy hitters that really affect well-being are less of a problem. So I think it really makes sense, like from a statistical perspective, that more variance in well-being is explained by social media in countries with fewer of some of those big risk factors we think of. Okay, so lots of graphs. I'm almost out of time. I just want to go over a couple of what I think are the key takeaways from this study. So first, right, girls tend to show larger, more negative effects or associations between their problematic social media use and life satisfaction. But these differences are really small, and notably, we see, in answer to that first research question, we see variance between countries. And I think because of that, it's really important that we avoid framing social media and well-being as this girl problem, right? We talk about it that way a lot. When I talk to parents, that seems to be like the go-to thing that they know. When we see persistent gendered patterns, we like to kind of over-apply them. We like to say like, oh, this is a boy problem, this is a girl problem, when really those differences are small. And so when it comes to social media and well-being, we need to make sure that we are appropriately talking about not just the persistence of these gender differences, but recognize that the magnitude is little, right? If we want to effectively intervene and make legislation and make differences in this space, we have to make sure that people understand where they fit into this problem. And I think over-gendering this particular issue would be a mistake. The next thing, right, if we think about that second research question, this study helps us see that physical health and education and women's role in society all are playing a role in shaping kind of the fabric that adolescents are a part of and that they are embedded in as they use social media, and it's changing the experiences that they're having. For me, that's great news because if it's a social thing, it means it's something that we can change and that we can think about and we can educate. It's not just this like inherent thing that we're stuck with. And then finally, I want to end with what for me was probably the most surprising part of this study, So often when we talk about gender differences in any area of research, the underlying assumption is that boys and men are the norm and women and girls are weird because they're not like boys. But in the study, what we saw is that boys were more susceptible to the effect of different social contexts on the association between their problematic social media use and life satisfaction. Another way of saying that same idea is that we found more variation among boys' experiences with problematic social media use based on the context that they were in. And what I would suggest that means is that there's a lot we can learn from boys' experiences about what makes social media risky or social media may be less problematic or even protective in terms of well-being and mental health for youth. I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you for your time.
Hi, thank you very much. Could you expand on that last point a little bit? It occurs to me as listening to a number of these talks, and when this whole business started 20 years ago, we were talking about the internet. Now we're talking about gaming, social media, pornography, et cetera, all these different domains. But even when we take the domain of social media, this is not a monolithic thing, right? So presumably there is no ability in the current data to drill down into exactly what social media content they are experiencing. And the question then, could you just talk a little bit about what you would expect to see in terms of these correlations if you're able to even just sort it into something as simple as innocuous versus presumably harmful?
Yeah. So part of the reason we focus on problematic social media use in this study is because, as we just talked about in the last talk, right, problematic media use is about the way that media use is fitting into your life, right? A lot of the items are like, is this disruptive? Are you having a hard time stopping to use this? It's not really about the amount of time you're spending, other than is the amount of time causing conflict. It's not about the actual content that you're consuming. It really is like, do you perceive this to be a problem in your life? Are you using social media in a way that you kind of wish you weren't, and that is causing problems for you? And so we were really trying to step beyond those issues of we can't measure screen time very well, content's really hard to wrangle, to really parse out and use a measure of social media use that has that negative valence. Because in theory, right, like if problematic social media use is problematic, it should kind of be equally problematic for everyone, right? If you're getting in fights with your friends and your family because of how much time you're on social media, there's not really a good reason why that should have a gendered lens, but we see that it does. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Shawcroft. And I would like to introduce our final talk today. So our final presentation of this session is Longitudinal Impacts of Problematic Internet Use on Social Relationships Across Multiple Ecological Domains of Children and Adolescents by Dr. Hyekyung Choo. Dr. Choo is an associate professor of social work at National University of Singapore. Currently, she is the Singapore site PI for a 12-country international project on media habits and social behaviors, and PI for translational study developing a parenting need assessment tool for interventions targeting adolescents' gaming disorder and excessive digital media use. So, Dr. Choo, please, I'd like to welcome you to the stage.
Okay, very good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hyekyung. I'm from the Department of Social Work, National University of Singapore. So I'm going to take you all the way to Singapore today. in this session, in my presentation. Today, I'm going to talk about pathological internet use among children and adolescents in Singapore, focusing on its negative impact on social relationship. The pathological internet use, or PIU for short, can be defined as excessive use of internet that damages an individual's social, occupational, or school, family, and psychological functioning with addictive symptoms like preoccupation, tolerance, loss of control, withdrawal, and escapism. The emphasis in this definition is not necessarily on excessive use, but the damage on their the functioning. So the this term PIU can be interchangeably used with problematic internet use you may heard of, or compulsive internet use or internet addiction. These days, I would also add the addictive use of screen or addiction to screen or addictive use of smartphone, because when you're on the smartphone or the screen, we're using internet anyway, right? The PIU is not classified as a clinical disorder. However, it doesn't mean the problem doesn't exist, of course. You know very well through this conference how harmful it could be, the prolonged use of internet, especially if the use is addictive. Especially the children and adolescents are much more vulnerable to PIU because of their early exposure to and early ownership of smartphone, as well as their advanced digital literacy and active engagement in social networking compared to adults. We all also know very well the harmful association between PIU and other digital media-based disorders, including the online gambling, gaming disorder, exposure to pornographies, and etc. And not to mention, it has very harmful effect on adolescents and children's mental health, of course, including suicidal ideation. But I see some major the gaps in prior research. One is I see more cross-national studies than longitudinal studies. That means we don't have very robust evidence for the growth trajectory of PIU. That means we don't know for sure whether this problem is persistent over time or unchanged, or just children just outgrow it over time. So that is one piece of evidence. We need more research to have more solid evidence. And then the lack of longitudinal study or fewer longitudinal study means if you are interested in the consequences of PIU, then without a longitudinal study, we can actually see its impact, negative impact. So this first problem, first gap we can identify from prior research. And then even among the studies that examine the PIU's negative effect, most of the study focuses on the mental health effect. Well, nothing's wrong with that. What could be more important than the mental health? But then the thing is, its negative impact on social relationships are relatively overlooked. And then even among the small number of studies that examine the social relationship as a consequence, damage the social relationship as a negative consequence of PIU, is limited, actually confined to looking at parent-child relationship. It doesn't really go beyond, the family domain. That means, not many studies actually look at the harmful effect of PIU on peer relationship or the children's relationship with the school. So with this, the research gaps in mind, my research team and I aim to examine the longitudinal trajectory of PIU among children and adolescents. And we also intended to determine whether the initial status of and the longitudinal changes in PIU predicts the initial status of and the longitudinal changes in social relationship outcomes, such as their relationship with their parents, peers, and school. To achieve these study aims, we collected data from a probability sample of children and adolescents in Singapore across 30 primary and secondary schools. We follow the same individual over 3 years at 4 different points in the data collection time. So we managed to get like over 3,500 children and adolescents. So in this study, the independent variable, otherwise, exogenous variable is PIU. It's not the outcome in our study, but we look at this as an independent variable, which was measured with 10 items like this. If you carefully read all specific statement here, then these items are quite closely aligned with the 9 diagnostic criteria for gaming disorder in DSM-5, actually. And then the outcomes. We selected 4 social relationship outcomes, one of which is parent-child trust, and another one is parent-child communication quality, and then another one is peer support, and then the last one is school avoidance. So to identify growth trajectory of PIU, we estimated unconditional latent growth curve model, and then to determine whether the baseline, PIU at baseline and the longitudinal change in PIU predicts the baseline outcomes and longitudinal changes in the outcomes. We actually estimated conditional latent growth curve model. So this is the descriptive statistics. Okay, now let me explain this graph to you. To identify longitudinal trajectory of PIU, the unconditional latent growth curve modeling shows that at the at the baseline, on average, the children's reported about like a 2.3. Yeah, that is what intercept means, 2.3 symptoms out of 10. Yeah, and then how it has changed over 3 years at 4 points in time. Actually, if you look at the sign of the slope, that is minus. That suggests that the trend is significantly downwards. Okay, in a sense, it's a piece of good news. The thing is, they tend to report fewer and fewer symptoms of pathological internet use over time. But okay, maybe this is not the full story. Maybe, yeah, we need to find out more behind the downward trend. But anyway, for the next research question, the results from the conditional latent growth trajectory, latent growth curve model, we saw, quite good fitness, good indexes of goodness of fit indexes for all 4 models for each of the outcome variables. What I want to highlight is, the association between PIU at baseline and then the outcome at baseline. The associations are all like significant in the hypothesized direction. And then when we look at whether the PIU at baseline predicts the longitudinal changes in the outcomes, then we have a less consistent result. So only the parent-child trust and then peer support, these 2 are associated with the PIU at baseline. And when it comes to the association between longitudinal changes in PIU and the longitudinal changes in social relationship variables, you see all significant results across different 4 social relationship outcomes. And then I want you to note that standardized coefficients are larger for the association between longitudinal changes in PIU and the longitudinal changes in the outcomes compared to the initial, the PIU at baseline and then the outcomes at baseline. This one is, I just told you all the findings just now. I would say the overall, especially the findings about parent-child relationship is quite consistent with the prior research. Probably the new piece of evidence I share here is probably the results about the peer support and then the school relationship. So in conclusion, I would like to highlight, pathological internet use has very comprehensive negative impacts on children and adolescents' social relationship across different ecological systems. So it's just not about their family relationship that is affected by PIU, but also their peer relationship and school relationships are also affected by pathological internet use. Finally, I would like to also highlight that when I see the significant association between the longitudinal changes in PIU and then longitudinal changes in all social relationship variables, that means, if with the timely intervention that actually address the number of symptoms of PIU actually can create the very positive impact on their social relationship too. So to me, it's a hopeful sign. Change is possible. In both ways. Yeah. So having said that, the intervention must be comprehensive enough to cover their social relationship around, their family members as well as peers and the school. Okay, so there are some limitations in this research, and then I would like to acknowledge the funding support from the Singapore Ministry, and that's it for my presentation, and thank you.
All right, so everybody, just another round of applause for all our presenters today. Thank you so much.